Thumbs up. Okay, so all good to go. So, hi to everyone who's looking in today. Want to introduce you all to Kate Quinn. Thanks, Kate, so much for joining us. So, for those that don't know, Kate's a New York Times and US Today best-selling author of historical fiction. A native of Southern California, she attended Boston University, where she earned a master's and bachelor degree in classical voice. She has written 4 novels in the Empress of Rome saga and 2 books in the Italian Renaissance before turning to the 20th century with the Alice Network, the Huntress, and the Rose Code, which have all been translated into multiple languages. And Kate and her husband now live in San Diego with 3 rescue dogs. So thanks, Kate, so much for joining you. I've recently read The Rose Code, and this is the first of your books that I've read and found it really, really interesting, really loved it. But lots of people have said to me that I have to read the Alice Network because so many people have told me how much they love the Alice Network. So just wondering, do you want to tell us any more about yourself or maybe about the Rose Code?
Oh, well, I don't think there's anything more to add about me. Any writer who says they lead a really fascinating life is only talking about the life in their head. My life is very dull. It's staying home with the dogs, and that was true even before we were all in lockdown. As far as the latest book that I have, that is The Rose Code, and just in summary, short summary, it tells the story of 3 very different women. A beautiful blue-blooded debutante, a tart-tongued London shop girl, and a shy crossword-solving spinster who are all recruited to the mysterious Bletchley Park, which is a secluded English country manor where the best and brightest minds in Britain work in direst secrecy, breaking Hitler's supposedly unbreakable military codes. So that is the Rose Code in a nutshell.
Mm. And how did you find out about this and get interested in writing about it?
Well, I think it really started out first with my fascination with Bletchley Park was started off by reading Robert Harris's wonderful novel Enigma. I really recommend it for anyone else who wants more Bletchley Park fiction. And I just love this whole idea of, really, it sounded like the most incredible Hollywood pitch of all time, a English country house stuffed with code breakers. I mean, you can imagine the pitch going, it's like, it's Downton Abbey meets sneakers, but in World War II, I love that idea. And the more I read about it, the more interested I was, especially when I realized that most of the stories about it, and that includes the nonfiction, were focusing on the men and on the male code breakers, which were some wonderfully, titanic male figures, like Alan Turing, for example. And they deserve everything that's been written about them, but there wasn't as much that was written about the women. And at its peak in 1945, of the 8,988 people working at Bletchley Park, 6,757 of those people were women.
Oh, wow.
So that's what made me think, if I'm going to write about this, I want to write about the ladies. What were the ladies doing? And that really was the thing that sort of kicked me down the rabbit hole of research and made me want to write this book.
And did you write most of it during lockdown, or did you start before that?
Well, I'd actually been writing before that, and I'd finished my rough draft, and I was finishing up, and I was doing my first, desperate, first round edits right before lockdown really happened. And, I was just, absolutely down the hole in editing and just starting to vaguely hear some rumblings about Corona and, various viruses. And I was barely listening, because when you're in that stage of the editing process, you're really not quite sane.
Yeah.
So I was just, working away, and I finally got that turned in, and I was barely coming up for air. And that's when the Corona virus hit and lockdown hit. And then I had to do all of my editing rounds while I was, in lockdown for the pandemic. And that does make this very much my pandemic book. It was tough, I have to admit, because, when you're editing, you really need to be fine-tuning. You're a perfectionist. You want to make it the best you can be. And frankly, it was really quite difficult to be, looking at my draft and just thinking, the world is on fire outside, and I don't really care that much about deepening my heroine's emotional arc right now. I just don't care.
Yeah.
But, you have to care, because I was thinking, you will care when this book comes out. And if you think that you have not done everything that you could do to make it the best book it could be. So that was the struggle with this book through, I swear, it must have been like 4 or 5 rounds of edits, trying to, summon the focus to work as hard on it as I knew I needed to make it any good at all.
Yeah.
So that was the trick for a pandemic book. And I will say it was a tough editing process.
I can imagine, yeah. And what about like the research? Were you able to go to Bletchley Park, and did you meet some of these women?
I did not end up meeting any of the ladies, although thank goodness there are a lot of taped interviews and podcasts with them, and I listened to a great many of those. It was another way the pandemic really snaffled me. There was a woman I found who worked in as a Bletchley Park code breaker, and she was in a local San Diego senior center. I was supposed to go talk to her mid-March, and we all know what happened in mid-March, and I just thought, this woman has survived the Blitz and World War II. There is no way I am going to take even the smallest chance of bringing anything into a senior center full of very old ladies, just for the sake of research. So that had to be called off, unfortunately, for which I really shake my fist at the sky. But now I did though manage to go to Bletchley Park itself, and that was in I think 2018, long before lockdown, thank goodness, because I knew just going into this book I would need to go to Bletchley Park itself. And I really encourage anyone who is now thinking about traveling, if you are in any vicinity of London, Oxford, Cambridge, Bletchley Park is sort of equidistant almost to all 3 of those locations. It is an absolutely beautiful visitor center and historic site. And the grounds are there, the house is there, the huts from World War II where the early code breaking was done are still there. And they're mocked up to look, many of them, the way they would have looked during the 1940s. So when you step in, it really is like walking right into the past. So really check it out if you can manage to be in the area.
Yeah. Bet it would be amazing. Yeah. We've got a few people watching, which is great, and a few comments and questions coming through. So Nalini said she loves any Bletchley Park fiction. And Arlene says she's glad you continued to care during the editing process.
I'm glad I did too, but it was a struggle.
And Nalima says she's curious about the title. Why did you choose Rose Code?
Oh, that's a fun one. That actually was one of the rare titles I managed to solidify quite early on. Everybody liked it. I had a number of other ones. I remember one was a number of other ideas. One was the Fracture Book, which was a name for some of the codes that had been a book of the codes that had already been broken. One was, I think, the Glass Code. I was thinking of doing something with glass as a metaphor. One was a golden silence because of Churchill's statement that the Bletchley Park code breakers were like the golden geese, the geese who laid the golden eggs but never cackled. So I kind of like that too. But it ended up being the Rose Code, and I partly picked that because I knew that my ladies at the very end of this particular book are going to have to crack a cipher that has never been cracked, and it would be something special, that I kind of made up for the purpose of this book. And the thing is, though, is that there were many, many ciphers that the Germans and the Italians and the Axis powers used. There'd be a different cipher for, German air travel or German air traffic, German land traffic. I think those were separate, might have been separate. German U-boat traffic, German surface naval traffic. They're all different. And so to differentiate them, at first, the Bletchley Park codebreakers used colors, just according to the colored pencil that they had on hand. So you'd say, like, is the red traffic broken today? That's the Luftwaffe traffic. Or it would be, is blue broken or green? But after a while, they ran out of pencils. They did not have that, Crayola box with, 112 color shadings. So after a while, they branched off to birds, and a bunch of the ciphers were named after birds. There were a number of ones that were named after marine mammals for the naval stuff, and there were some that were named after plants. I think there technically was, later I found a very obscure cipher that was named after Rose, but I thought, since I know they use birds, they use animals, they use colors, why not use a flower?
Yeah.
And so I decided I would use rose for my particular one because it would need some kind of, particular, it would need some kind of designation. And I thought just a rose in general is such a great image. I could do a lot with that thematically. So it became the rose code.
And I'm interested to know, like, there's a lot of information in your book, so you must have done a lot of research, and it is a bit of a bigger book than normal we would see.
Oh, it's hefty.
I
I'm
think
sorry. I tried to make it shorter.
it's nearly, is it about 600 pages, I think it is. How long did it take for you, like all the research and writing and?
Well, I think really start to finish this book was about 18 months just to draft and to get the first round of edits through, and then to, at least I think it was another 6-8 months for another few rounds of edits. So, and then, given some of the research I did before I did any drafting at all, we're probably looking at over 3, close to 4 years. From the very first of, hey, I wonder if I could write a book about women code breakers at Bletchley Park, to this is turned in and I can't do any more fixes on it. So it was quite a long process. There was a lot of research for this book. It was more research heavy than really anything I have done in the past.
Yeah.
Just simply because there was such a huge mass of information. It was information about code breaking, about Enigma ciphers, about bomb machines, about British life on the home front, about Bletchley Park itself, about the recreation life they had in between, their work, about what was the, how were the shifts scheduled, what was the Official Secrets Act. There was so much. So I actually ended up for the very first time working with an independent researcher to help me fact check for this, and it's a wonderful author named author who has worked with Bletchley Park before, and her specialty is the ladies of Bletchley Park. So I really knew I needed that in this book because there was so much to get wrong.
Yeah. And Arlene says she likes that the unraveling of the rose petals is actually like a metaphor for code breaking as well.
Well, code breaking, it's not so much about math in the way that it was done. It was more about pattern recognition. And I think people who had a gift for pattern recognition were the kind of minds that tended to be good at it. A lot of the people they recruited were people who were good with linguistics, so crossword people who could do well with crossword puzzles. Some actresses were hired, and like linguists, of that type, because they were good with words. Mathematicians did tend to be good at it just because, again, pattern recognition. Musicians, they said as well. But on the other hand, some people turned out to be good at it who had no qualifications. So, you never could tell.
And Divine's wondering if you're working on something else at the moment.
Yep, I literally closed up my laptop and on the book that I'm editing right now and slid right into here to do this particular talk. And as soon as we hang up, I guarantee you I'm going right back to it.
Yeah.
Because I'm in the middle of editing my next book, which should come out March of 2022, so less than a year away.
Okay.
And that is titled The Diamond Eye. And it is another World War II novel, and it is about the most famous and deadly female sniper in history, who was a Russian history student and single mother who went to the Russian front when Hitler invaded Russia and became so successful at her job that she earned the nickname Lady Death. And if that wasn't, the most hair-raising thing ever, I also learned that she went on a goodwill tour to America in 1942 and, just as one does, happened to become really great friends with Eleanor Roosevelt. So I was just like, I've got to write this. I just have to.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. And how did you first find out about her?
I had her in my back pocket for a little while, actually, because I ran across her more when I was doing my research for my previous book before the Rose Code, which was The Huntress. The Huntress centers in part around the all-female regiment of night bomber pilots that flew against Hitler's Eastern Front. The all-female Russian women. Blech, that didn't come out right. The all-female regiment of Russian bomber pilots. And when I was learning about this, I was so startled to learn that Russian women were in the Red Air Force. They were allowed to be pilots in a way that, women in the Allied nations were not. They were women in the Allied nation, whether it was England or America of France, like they would fly in support roles maybe, but they were not allowed to fly in combat.
Yeah.
And that actually stretched for the Russians to a lot of things. Russian women were in the Red Air Force as bomber pilots and fighter pilots. They were in the armies as, not just as the medical corps, but also as snipers. And that's where I ran across the story of Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who was a famous sniper. And that was one of those things I just was, my jaw just hit the floor. But that's the kind of thing that, I am no apologist for the Soviet Union, but they were a little bit ahead in terms of some things, like the Russian women were allowed to contribute to the fight in more direct ways than women in France or England or America or any of the Allied nations were. Like just in England, I remember learning that, like, for women to man the artillery positions, they were allowed to do every single part about the calculations, but they were forbidden specifically from being the one who actually fired the gun.
Oh,
because
wow.
it was like, oh no,
Okay.
we can't allow the ladies to fire the gun. Whereas
Yeah.
if you told the Russian women that, they would have been like, come again? It's like, I've got 309 kills. You're going to tell me I can't fire a gun? No.
Yeah.
So it was the kind of thing that there's a real dichotomy in the difference of the fighting experience for women, for women in the USSR versus women in the other Allied nations.
Yeah, sounds really, really interesting. Certainly something I've never heard of before, so sounds like a great read.
Well, we'll see. It's very rough right now. I'm in the stage where it's sort of like, this is never going to be done. It's never going to be any good, but I got to keep plugging. But I hit that stage with every book, and that's what I try to remind myself.
And Kelly says your books reflect the amount of research you do. Do you have a book that you enjoyed researching the most?
Oh, that's a fun one. It wasn't the Rose Code. That was too much to research, and it was in a lot of very technical sort of subjects and I'm not a very technologically minded person. So no, it was not the Rose Code. That was not my favorite. I really did enjoy researching the Huntress, because the Russian flying stuff I really loved, and that I did my very favorite bit of hands-on research that I did for any book with that one. And that was when I literally was able to go out to a local airfield in near San Diego, and I did a flight in an actual World War II biplane that was very comparable to the kind of planes the Night Witches would have been flying. And that was so thrilling, and it was it was such an incredible experience. I'm not much of a thrill seeker. I keep my adventures on the page, but it was fun to be able to at least feel like a daredevil, when I was there and when I was in that plane and when I was writing about these women who were so incredibly daredevilishly brave. And so it was like getting to be a different person almost when I was researching their stuff and writing it.
And Nalima's wondering, would have you traveled to Russia for your current book for research if you were able to?
I would love to if I could. Right now, it's not really possible.
No.
I was not able to do that for the Huntress either, or maybe I could have. But the trouble is, when you're researching, you have to balance the cost, like the cost versus the benefit versus the outcome. And the thing is that I realized that most of my scenes in Russia, it was only about a third of the book, and most of it was taking place on the front. And when you're on the front, pretty much everything is a turnip field and a makeshift airdrome and a lot of night skies. And I was like, I'm not sure I can justify the expense of flying halfway around the world when I can get really good descriptions of what it was like from the women on the ground at the time. And when I go back and I look at it, I'm going to basically be standing in a turnip field outside Odessa and be like, yep, this is a turnip field. And this is the kind of field they would have taken off from. But did I really want to spend the money to go that far? And could I afford to? And these are the questions you have to balance when it comes to how far you travel and what you're willing to do to travel to research.
Yeah. Arlene's wondering who the most challenging character was to write or develop in the Rose Code.
Oh, that's a good one. I think probably my cryptanalyst heroine named Beth was difficult because she is the one who is a real code-breaking genius. She has that pattern recognition brain. She's so good at what she does, and I am not good at what she does, and I don't think I ever would be good at what she does, but I had to fake it because otherwise it wouldn't work. So the trouble with writing best sections is that I will be sitting there with some book, explaining how do you break the obver enigma, and it says something like, well, you look for the settable umquavelts, and then after that you button up the bigram table and look for the cross section, and I'm just sitting there like I read that paragraph 10 times, and it still makes no sense to me. Now, what I really came out on realizing was that I actually don't have to, as a novelist, teach the reader how to break the obver enigma.
No.
You can find YouTube videos that will do that for you, or books that will break that down, and you're welcome to go find them. Maybe you'll find them more explicable than they were to me. My job, though, as a novelist, is not to tell you how to do it, but to tell you how it felt to break obver enigma. And that's really where I leaned into it. So I would learn just enough about the technicalities of it to be able to get it on the page, so I knew it was accurate. And then after that, I would dig into how did it feel, and that was really where I got very excited, and I love doing it because really it's a I've talked to some people in modern intelligence, and they say similar things about, like, oh God, you can go down that rabbit hole and it's like the whole world goes away, and the thrill of breaking into something is just nothing that you've ever felt before. And so I really was thinking, I really dug into that for Beth, how did it feel? And there were a lot of war diaries too from women at the time who also described that that's what it felt like. And so that's really where I leaned in. But it was a little tricky trying to, describe someone who is a natural genius at something that I am not even competent at minimally. So that was tricky for Beth.
Yeah. And Arlene's just got another great question. Do you cry when you write emotional, hard scenes?
I have been known to make myself tear up. Yes, that does happen sometimes. And I don't enjoy writing them. If I have to kill off some beloved character, it is not fun.
And I'm interested to know, had you always wanted to be a writer?
I really can't remember a time when I wasn't. I was, I think very fortunate in that, my mom was a librarian and also a history major. She had a degree in ancient and medieval history. So I was learning, stories about the past just as a kid. And, my mom read to me from when I was very young.
Sounds like your dogs want to join on.
Yeah, we all know the dogs there's a garbage truck outside. The barbarian birds are at the gates. I'm surely going to be dragged off and killed. They managed to run out of the room and unplug the laptop too. But hopefully now they're barking at least out there. But I was lucky enough anyway that my mom read to me when I was a young age before I could read myself. And I really think that did everything for me because, I know I did not learn to read, particularly young. I know a lot of people that did, but what I learned very, very young was to love books and to love stories. So that as soon as I was able to hold a pencil and scrawl out some letters, I was writing stories.
Yeah.
I wrote my very first short story. I was 7 years old, and it was all about the assassination of Edward II.
Oh, that's very young.
Really out of my
for a 7-year-old
doll book.
Yeah.
And for a 7-year-old, that story had murder. It had assassination. It had pools of blood. It had adultery. It had conspiracy. It's pretty good. It's pretty advanced. Oh, be quiet, for God's sake. It was pretty advanced stuff for
for a 7-year-old. Yeah, certainly.
Pages on a sheet of typing paper.
Yeah.
But I never stopped after that. That was my very first story, and I was never without a project after that, and that's really how I got my beginning.
Yeah. And when you were a child, did you have some favorite books you liked reading?
I really cut my teeth on some early historical fiction. Sally Watson was wonderful she wrote great YA historical fiction, which was really beautifully researched, and it had very young characters who still managed to have these great adventures. I loved that. And then I got hooked on Gwen Bristow. She's a bit of a more obscure historical fiction author now dead, but at the time was quite successful in her day. But she wrote some American set hisfic, which I loved. Anya Seton's Catherine totally got me when I was about in middle school. So did Pauline Gedge's Eagle and the Raven. After that, I was just reading everything I could.
Yeah. So historical fiction was always your love?
it was what I always wanted to write, and it's certainly what I most enjoy reading when I find a really good one. But to be honest, I will read anything. I mean, I love sci-fi. I'll read a good space opera or a good, a good romance. I love a Regency romance when I'm in the mood. I love literary. I love, a good mystery, like a good pot boiler whodunit. I will read just about anything if it has a good story, good writing, good characters.
And what is there anything you've been reading lately that you might want to recommend to us?
Well, my wonderful friend and colleague Stephanie Dre has a wonderful book, The Women of Chateau Lafayette, which is 3 generations of women all revolving around the same castle in France and 3 different wars, World War I, World War II, and the French Revolution. It's a just sensationally complicated, ambitious, wonderful book, which I can really recommend. I am looking forward to, I haven't cracked it yet, but maybe tonight's the night. I'm looking forward to Andy Weir's new sci-fi project, Hail Mary. And I read a lot of advanced books for ARCs for cover quotes. And one of the great ones I read recently was Vanessa Riley's Island Queen, about an enslaved woman who rises from those constrained beginnings to become, an entrepreneur and a matriarch and this absolute trailblazer in the Caribbean where she's born. And so that was another great one I read not long ago. So I am always got a number of books on the go.
Yeah, thanks. They sound like some good ones to look at. Erica's wondering how the narrators are chosen for your audiobooks.
Well, I've been lucky enough with the last 3 that I've had Saskia Marleveld, who is just chef's kiss perfection. She's great. And I got her when it came time to do the audiobook for the Alice Network. I was sent 2 clips of the 2 final choices of narrator, and I was asked, do you have a preference between these 2 narrators? And I liked them both very much, but there was something about Saskia's voice I really loved. And I also was really impressed by how many accents she could do, because that book required English, French, American, Scottish, German, you name it, it was there. So she was really going through the ringer there. And she did such a great job with that book. And, she was nominated for an Audie, which is sort of like the Audible Award equivalent of an Oscar for Best Female Narrator that year for it. And so that was such a huge hit. And then I got a chance to meet her when I next went to New York, and it was just great to meet her. But as soon as I was done with the Huntress, I was emailing her and I was saying, please tell me you can read this book, and please tell me you can do a Russian accent. And she pretty much said yes and yes. And I pretty much did the same thing for the Rose Code. I said, I really hope you can do this one. So I have requested her ever since, just because she's done such a great job. And I hope she can keep reading mine, because, everybody always raves about what a good job she does. And I'm so pleased by that, because there's been such a boom with audiobooks. It's more and more becoming the way that a lot of people are getting their reading done. And, so a good narrator makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Arlene's saying she knows that you collaborate with other writers. What do you enjoy most about it, and what's the most challenging, and how do you resolve any conflicts?
Well, the fun part about collaboration is that when you're locked in your own brain, sometimes it can start going in circles. But when you have other brains, also working on the same problem, it means you can crowdsource a solution to almost anything. Somebody will have a solution, and that really does make for many hands light work. And that really is a fantastic a benefit when you're drafting or when you're researching or fact checking. And it's one of those things too where it means it's great to have someone who is every bit as obsessed with what you're writing as you are, because sometimes it can feel a little bit odd when you're bursting with enthusiasm about Bletchley Park code breakers or the night witches in Russian aviation, but you don't really have anybody to talk to about this yet, because you're the one who's down that rabbit hole, and really you don't have anybody else to discuss it with. So when you have co-authors, you always have somebody to geek out to, and that's a lot of fun. As far as drawbacks, I mean, it's always the sort of thing of like, if you have a difference of opinion about what will happen in a book, that of course has to be worked out. But I've had very few of those, really, because you tend to do all the wrangling and the like what are we doing? What are we trying to say? What are our themes? Those are the things that get worked out in advance in discussions. So that seems to happen very naturally and organically. We've always had sort of a rule about, at least in the project I've had, about majority rules if there has to be a vote, but I don't think it's ever really come down to that. It's more been if there is, a discussion about, well, what could we do this or that? We just tend to talk it out until suddenly the solution just seems to, present itself, and usually it does.
Yeah. And what about reviews? Do you check out your reviews?
No, I try not to. I'm trying to get to the point like Bernard Cornwell where I don't read any of them. I do sometimes look at ones that I'm tagged in, or that my trade reviews, like a library journal or, a Washington Post review, if my publicist will send it to me. But generally speaking, if I see a review and I see that it's negative, I have the self-control now. I just close that very firmly and put it aside. And the reason for that is just that it's not that I think that I want to argue with anybody that they didn't like my book. That's your right. That's fine. I actually just had an exchange with a reader on Goodreads. Someone who said, "I'm really bored with the Rose Code. Like, should I stick it out? It's 200 pages and I've got 400 to go. Does it get any better? I don't know if I should stick this out." And I broke my rule about answering, because normally I don't answer things like that, but I just said, please abandon it. Like, life is too short to read stuff you're not enjoying. Please go find a book you like better, which I believe very firmly.
Yeah.
Now, I always agree that, it's anybody's right to dislike a book, and I never mind. I do think it's rude, though, when people make a point of tagging you in something negative, because it's like, why do you feel the need to share that with me? Because I can't do anything about it. The book's already out. I can't do anything. I can't edit it at this point. So really, when I'm seeing negative feedback after the book is out, the only thing it's going to do is rattle around in my head and take up too much space. Whereas, during the editing process, I encourage negative feedback, because that's the point when I have the chance to still improve things and make it better.
Yeah.
So I try not to. I don't read negative reviews at all if I can help it. I read. I sometimes read some of the other ones if I'm tagged in them or I come across them, but I try not to go too far down that particular rabbit hole.
Yeah. And could you tell us what being a successful writer means to you?
I think it's nice. Being a successful writer, I would say, is can I find that Venn diagram sweet spot between writing something that I adore and then writing something that I will also be able to sell to enough readers that I can continue to pay my bills with it and feed my dogs. I count that as very much success. I think you do have to write what you love if you're a writer. You can't write something that you don't love. But on the other hand, when you turn writing into a job, you have to consider the market, and you have to consider things like you're going to have to write when you don't want to because a deadline is coming, and you have to think about, well, I would love to write this book, but the fact is books about X or Y just are not selling right now. So you have to may have to think about, well, what else could I write that will sell better? And, part of that is just guesswork. There is no guarantee in this business, but I think a successful writer is someone who can remain passionate about their work, but be flexible enough to roll with the punches that this business deals out, because it's a crazy business and you do have to be able to roll with punches if you are deciding to make a career of it and not just a passion. Now, I know that if I was not publishing books, I would still be writing them. I would just be sticking them in drawers. And in that case, then you have the right, when you do that, you don't have to work when you don't feel like it. You don't have to consider what are people reading right now. When you pick your topic, you can write about anything you want because this is what you're doing out of love. But I also want to make a career out of this. So I also have to consider things like writing when I don't want to, and what people are reading, and not just what do I feel like telling them they should read.
Yeah. And do you set aside a certain amount of time, or make sure you do a certain amount of words per day?
It tends to depend. It depends a little bit on what part of the process I'm in. If I'm drafting, I try to get 1,500, 2,000 words a day, 5 days a week. I don't usually write every day. I try to take weekends off because I need time off at some point. And when I'm on deadline crunches, weekends disappear, and so do my evenings, and so do my mornings. So when things are a little bit more ordinary, I do try to make sure I maintain at least some kind of time off for myself in reasonable hours. But that's generally what I do. I usually wake up in the morning, do my workout, walk the dogs, do whatever errands need doing, microwave lunch of whatever I can eat standing up at the fridge door, and then I write all afternoon. That's usually my routine.
Okay. And Arlene's wondering what the most helpful editing advice or feedback that you've received was.
That's an easy one, and that's one of the most useful thing, one of the best things I have ever heard, which came from my very first agent. My very first agent picked me out of a slush pile, essentially, when I submitted to her this far too long manuscript about a Roman emperor who was relatively obscure. And she said, I like this, but it's way too long. You have way too many viewpoints and you need to do some serious edits. And I said, okay, I'm going to go at this with a cleaver until it is chopped into better shape. And I did, and she sold it. And that was my very first book, Mistress of Rome. And when we met for lunch for the very first time, I actually asked her, it's like, what were the odds, what kind of odds were you, laying on whether I'd be able to turn that around to you in some sort of shape that you could sell? And she said 50-50.
Oh, really?
And then I said, really? And she said after that, 50% of new writers will sink themselves because they either cannot or they will not put in the kind of editing that it takes to turn a beloved child of a manuscript into something that will sell. And that always stayed with me. It's one of those things where I think we all have sort of a romantic idea of like, there's the publisher who's going to ask you to sell out and you're going to say, no, never. And you will never make those changes, but you may have to ask yourself, I don't know, is it really selling out? Do you want to make this a career?
Yeah. Maybe
the changes are a better idea the more you think about it. I mean, I know for me, when I look back at some of those changes I made to that first book, I realized it was too long. I did not need that many viewpoints. All of those changes 100% belonged there. And that's the thing I think about, is that you have to put your ego aside, even when you're looking at your book baby and thinking, I cannot possibly make a cut on this. I'm afraid you've gotta. And you don't want to sink yourself before you even get started by saying, I can't do this or I won't do this.
Yeah. And I'm interested to know your ideas for new books. Are they now coming from a lot of research you're doing with other books and then you put something away and think, oh, I'll have to put that in a book by itself? Or are you looking for new things altogether as well?
A little bit of both. Some ideas come when I'm actively looking for them. When it was the Alice Network, I was trying to find, I was looking around I knew I wanted something 20th century. I was thinking female spies, not sure what I want to do with this. And that was early 2014 and then 2015. And that was when we were starting to see all these articles online about various 100-year anniversaries for World War I. So suddenly World War I was all over my timeline on social media, and I'm thinking, well, I'm going to look that direction. And then the more I sort of steered into that, the more focused things got until I stumbled across the real Alice Network story and realized this will be great. In that case, I was actively looking for, a new topic, and I just had a few ideas for maybe what it could involve. And then the more I looked at the more widely I read, when you're daisy chaining between articles online and Wikipedia and this and that, the more you daisy chain, the more chances are your ever widening circles are going to find something. And then quite often, while I'm researching one book, I'll run across an interesting snippet that makes me think, I wonder if that could be another book. That happened a little bit. I was researching the Night Witches for the Huntress, and then I come across, a lady sniper named Lady Death. And I thought, I'm putting you in my back pocket and I'm keeping you for later because that is too good to miss. So it sometimes becomes a little bit of both. You find things, and then also you go looking for things, then you usually find something different. And then I've also found too that quite often the muse will send me ideas when she's not supposed to, because if I'm, banging my head against a wall on edits, the muse is not finding any answers, she'll start saying, you know, I'm really bored with this now. Why don't we think about this instead? And she'll send me some completely unrelated book idea, and that's when I'm like, not helpful right now. But I write the book idea down and I look at it later, and then sometimes it's like, all right, well, maybe that actually is a good idea once I'm, you know, done with the edits in hand.
And do you completely finish one book before you'll even start thinking about something else, or do you do
no,
a bit of...
the other book always, the muse always wants to cheat. She's very unfaithful. So, you know, she's always wants to think about new stuff, especially when she's getting bored with the current stuff. But generally the way the publishing cycle works is that, you know, if I want to think about the books I've written, is that I right now am editing. I might be, you know, like, I'm editing the Diamond Die. I am actively promoting the Rose Code. I am doing book club reads for the Huntress and for the Alice Network, and, you know, doing, you know, promo for them too, like when it comes up from book clubs. And then I'm also thinking about what I'm going to write next. So that that is like 6 or 7 different books that are all circling around in my head. Generally, there'll be one in editing stage, one in drafting stage, one in promo stage, and one in I just need to remember. I need to remember the main details about this book, and then the last book before that, just in case anybody wants to know, like, what was the Alice Network about? And then, so I'm not saying I don't know. That was several years ago, and I don't remember anymore.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot to keep remembering. And could you tell me what's the most surprising thing that you've found when you've been researching for any of your books?
I was very surprised in the Rose Code by all the royal connections, which I ended up using to pop up in the book because they were already there in history. For one thing, the former Kate Middleton / current Duchess of Cambridge's grandmother was a Bletchley Park codebreaker. She worked in Hut 16 as a codebreaker, and that was a surprising thing. So that, you know, immediately I'm like, I can't not include her. She's going to pop up in the background, and she does. Kate Middleton's grandmother is in the background. The other thing I found out was that Prince Philip, in the days before Princess Elizabeth came onto the scene, when he was just a sort of threadbare royal cousin and a British Navy lieutenant fighting in the war, he had a very serious wartime girlfriend named Osla. She was a Canadian-born debutante who was also a Bletchley Park translator. And, you know, the two of them were really quite serious, and used to dance the night away in London in nightclubs whenever he was in town, and he'd put her on the dawn train back to Bletchley so she could make her morning shift in her cocktail dress. And that was another thing that was very real. And I decided, well, I think I'm going to use that too, you know, just because it really was quite surprising that was there. And the royals weren't the only ones who came through Bletchley, because they employed so many thousands of people by the end of the war. There were a lot of interesting connections, you know, like, for example, Ian Fleming, you know, who created James Bond, was in and out of Bletchley Park since he worked for British intelligence. And I honestly think that probably James Bond owes something to Bletchley Park, because Ian Fleming looked around and was like, this needs to be a lot more glamorous. It's a lot of people in like cardigan sweaters, you know, swearing down at notepads and scribbling things with pencils. And there need to be like more sexy women in satin dresses and more cocktails and more high-speed chases for this to be fun. And, you know, he was correct. You know, the work was critical, but it is not what you could call high octane. So I think he made James Bond in part because he thought that's how intelligence work should be, and that's not how it was.
I found the reference of Prince Philip quite interesting as well in the book.
So did I. I really was quite. It really did, you know, kind of make me cringe, though, you know, considering that his death happened so soon
after the book.
I felt like a little bit like a ghoul. I mean, I was sort of feeling like, okay, this man died, and part of he had an extraordinary life, and including a 73-year, you know, over like a 73-year marriage, or 75, or how long they were married. So buy my book about his younger self with, you know, his pre-war girlfriend, and I was like, oh God.
Divine's wondering who your first readers are, and how many times do they reread different versions?
Oh, that's a good one. My first reader is always my mom. She's, you know, the history enthusiast and the librarian. She's a voracious reader. And the thing is that, people who say things like, well, if you want to have someone just tell you your book is wonderful, get your mom to read it. She'll tell you that. Oh, not mine.
No.
And I say that in a good way. Like, she's got a very keen eye for things like, plotting and pacing. And she has absolutely no trouble, putting on the side of the writing in the margin, this whole scene is too slow and you need to cut it down and you need to, lop off this part at the entrance and start it here instead of here. And next scene is dim and stagey. And I think the whole thing could be cut altogether. And I'm like, okay. So she's always my first reader. And I think she reads probably every draft that I do, which means she's probably read, 15 different iterations by the time it goes to print. She ends up hitting the same stage that I do, where it's like, she's like, I hate this book now and I don't have anything else to read. And I'm like, yeah, me too. So let's ask somebody else to read it. I have a couple of author friends who are marvelous critique partners who generally read my first finished draft, when I'm done with that. And they give me the big picture stuff that I fix before I send it to my actual New York editor, who then reads it and then comes back to me with more edits, and I do that. And then my husband always reads it at some point. He's a very good, he's got a very good keen instinct for a lot of human nature and character development stuff. And he's always the one who wants me to go further with something. It's like, he's like, no, make it hurt more, make it darker, make it harder. And it's like, and so he's always the voice of the dark side. And so I have any number of readers really. And I'm always indebted so much to all of them, because a fresh set of eyes is really the best thing in the world for helping you to figure out what your book is. And that's where fellow authors actually are really great, because we all agree, like, we can't fix our own book problems. We'll be banging our heads on our own plot problems that have been consuming us for months. But when somebody else, when a fellow author asks you to fix their problems, their book problems are easy to fix. So we all tend to help each other out, just because somebody else will have the solution that I have been looking for weeks. And I'm always eager to ask, so I can just, shortcut a little bit.
Yeah, sounds like you have a great support group around you.
I do. And, I actually think that the best thing about this business, one of them is that this wonderful group of colleagues that I have, they are so supportive. They are such great cheerleaders for each other's work. I am for theirs, they are for mine. And there really is not a sense of competition among us. It's like a rising tide floats all the boats. We want to see historical fiction, women's fiction, stories by and about and for women succeed and grow the market, because that does nothing but help all of us. Yeah. And it's the kind of thing where I really have come across very little, jealousy or, backbiting or any of that stuff that you sometimes see in some professions. It's like, I have seen nothing but, wonderful support and aid and, enthusiasm from the people in this business, the women who are specifically part of this particular field I'm in. And, I'm so lucky to have them as friends and as colleagues and, as people who can be counted on to, sometimes chime in when you're feeling really low and you're really wondering if maybe you need to give this whole thing up and stick to your strengths and become a dog walker. And they're the ones who are going to say, oh, shut up. You always do this at this part of the process. You're brilliant. You're fine. The book's going to be good. And then you remember, okay, I can keep doing this. And then they hit that same part and you do the same thing for them.
Yeah.
And that's what I love.
Yeah, that's great. And Arlene is wondering how you sustain your passion in your writing, and what do you do to take time out and breaks other than spending time with your dogs?
Well, my husband is a wonderful cook, so we have an evening dinner ritual where he'll cook and I read aloud from a book that we're going to be reading together. And generally it's something that I've already read and then I know he'll love. So I was talking earlier about how people get their fiction read via audiobook. That's how he reads his fiction, only I'm the audio narrator. So we do that together almost every night when we're at home. I have a beautiful garden I love to sit out in, and even if I try not to touch the plants too much, because then they just wither and die. He's also got the green thumb. I just look at the plants, and that's better for everybody concerned. And then I do a lot of reading. I read every night at least for an hour or so. It's how I unwind, and I need to read something that is nothing to do with work. I love great movies. I love TV because this is, again, it's a way to analyze storytelling, and I think we're living in a real golden age for TV and great storytelling content there. So that's how I unwind. And as far as how to keep the passion for it, I think it's just the idea that every book is new and different and fresh in some way, even if it's in a similar era. I've had a couple of World War II books in a row, but they're so different in terms of the kind of fight that they are describing that it has not felt stale to me. Yeah. And I hope always that I try to recreate something a little different and new with every book that I write, so that I never feel like I'm writing the same book twice.
Mm-hmm. And have you ever thought about writing something other than historical fiction?
Not really. I mean, I've had the occasional idea, but when I was younger and writing sort of practice books, just early books, I remember I tried a whodunit, which basically just proved that I should not write whodunits. And I tried a sci-fi, which proved that I really should not try to write sci-fi. And I tried a YA novel, which really proved I should not write YA. So I did a certain amount of dabbling, and basically what it taught me was stick to historical fiction. Although I don't know, I've been thinking a lot lately, with some wonderful sort of magic realism historicals, like the Hidden Life of Addie LaRue, and what's the other one, The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. These are books that sort of excited me and made me think, I wonder if I could write something with, I don't know, a little brush of magic in it, something like that. But who knows? I'll see if it goes anywhere.
Yeah. Jill's wondering how you found your group of colleagues. Was it through a publisher or a writers group?
I really met my first batch of historical fiction friends when I went to the Historical Novel Society conference.
Okay.
My very, very first one, like 3 ago. And my first book I had sold my first book, but it hadn't come out yet. I knew nobody in this business. And I met so many people there who, welcomed me with open arms. And I was just so gobsmacked. I mean, they just sort of pulled me into the center of everything. I was sort of the newbie who's watching wide-eyed. That was the conference where Diana Gabaldon was there, and she had this massive broadsword on her back, which she had brought because she was loaning it to a friend who was doing a Shakespeare speech at the fight scene reading the first night. And, she had given me a cover quote for my very first book. So I walked up to Diana Gabaldon and I'm like, you gave me a cover quote, and I'm thinking you're this huge star, and I am absolutely nobody in this business. And I can't believe you were so nice to do that. So I said, can I please buy you a whiskey? And she said, absolutely, yes. And I got to meet all these people. And then I realized I was going to lose them if I didn't get on social media, which I was not. So I did get on social media so I could keep in touch. And then after that, not long after that, I was lucky enough, I moved to Maryland. And that was where I met my very good colleague, Stephanie Dre, because I'd given a cover quote to her book. So we met in person for lunch. And then I met another friend who I'd met at that same Historical Novel Society conference, also for lunch because she lived in Virginia. And then I got pulled into the local chapter of the Romance Writers of America. And I met a bunch of other authors through there who went sort of between romance and historical. And that's really where it started. And the more conferences I went to, the more events I attended, the more I got active in, online groups and so forth. That, and the more I read, and the more, books I read for cover quotes, and the more I monitored, what was coming out in this business and who was, selling what, the more people I got to know. And that's really how I did get to know people. And I have been so delighted ever since to keep them in my life.
Yeah, that's great. And can you tell people how they can keep in touch with you, like what social media you have?
Well, you can find me on my Facebook page. It's just @KateQuinnAuthor. I'm also on Twitter, also @KateQuinnAuthor. And on Instagram, it's @KateQuinn5975 for some reason. I don't know. Okay. So it's numbers there, but you can find me there too. And those are the 3 places where I tend to be. I'm not on TikTok yet. I refuse. I have learned 3 forms of social media. That is enough. Please don't tell me I have to learn anymore. But I do like those 3 forms, and you can usually find me there.
Yeah. And if people do reach out to you, if readers reach out to you, do you have time to respond to everyone or some of the people, or?
I try to, although, if I don't always see everything, generally speaking, I hardly ever see DMs. So like direct messages through Twitter or Instagram or Facebook may not get to me just because they keep getting pushed down and then I don't see them. But if you shoot me a question on, one of my Facebook posts or one of my Instagram posts, usually I'll see it and I'll try to answer it if I can, as long as I'm not, head down in the editing cycle.
Yeah, that's great. And I really enjoyed chatting to you today. Been great, and I've certainly learnt a lot.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is a terrific bit of social fun in the middle of my workday. So
yeah, no, great. And thanks everyone. We've had some really, really great questions as well. So thanks everyone who's joined in. Bye everybody.
All right. Bye everyone.